All right, today we're going to talk about ecological succession. So, succession, if you've heard of maybe the presidential line of succession means that if something were to happen to the president, then the vice president would be the president. If something happened to both of them, it would continue on down and down. I believe the next person would be the Speaker of the House. It would continue on and on. So there's a series of events that happen in order if something happens to the president or all the people down that line. Ecological is what we've been talking about, ecology. So this is the ecological succession, meaning that there's a certain series of events and certain order of plants that grow in an area. And so if you were to, let's go ahead and jump over here. So we got primary succession. Secondary succession we'll get to in a second. It's pretty easy. If you understand primary, you can get secondary. Primary succession, the most important thing about this to remember is that there is no soil. Primary succession, a common example to this would be if a volcano erupted and it put down lava that turned into rock, feet and feet of rock, or an island was being formed, but there's no soil. Another example of this could be you may be able to see some of this in like a large parking lot, or if there is a glacier that retreats. So a glacier is a very, very, very large piece of ice, and as it's going downhill or moving across a continent, it can actually scrape up a lot of the soil. So what's left is just bare rock. But essentially, primary succession has no soil. We're starting with bare rock. And down the line, and this is over a very long period of time, this could be hundreds of years, that goes from rocky soil to a climax community. So we got bare rock. We have these things called lichen that start growing on the rock. Now it's likely that you've seen this before. You've probably seen this. Here's an example of lichen. You've seen this on trees, on branches, typically that are older, but not all the time. And then you've also probably seen it on rocks. So this may be a color. If you zoomed out, this would be all over a rock, or maybe just in certain parts of the rock. But that's lichen, and what lichen does is it starts to chemically break down the rock, and then as year after year after year after year of lichen are living and dying and living and dying and living and dying, between that and the rock being broken down, it starts to make little pockets of soil. And then over time, later on, you start getting grasses and flowers that can start to grow in very, very small amounts of soil. So you don't have bare rock and then you've got trees growing on it, generally. So now that could maybe happen if you had a really big crack in it and there's soil below, but in general, you have a big rock and then you have a pioneer species. The first species that comes out is the lichen and some moss. You've seen moss before. You can look up pictures of that if you want to, but not Spanish moss, but moss that looks like a green carpet almost. Lichen and moss are the pioneering species, and they're breaking down the rock. Then you get grasses and flowering plants, small little herbs that start showing up, and then you start to see more of a food web. Some small food webs develop. You've got pollinators that are able to come in. You've got different small insects, maybe some small reptiles that can come in and eat those, and they would be the apex predator. But you're not going to see a bunch of probably big birds like eagles or lions, large mammals. You're going to see just small food webs. But every year that those plants live and then drop their leaves and stems and flowers, and then that happens year after year after year, it's breaking down. There's more and more soil. And then you get to where you've got less and less moss. And you can see I try to draw here where the rocks are actually starting to develop cracks from freezing and thawing of the water and roots getting in there and kind of breaking that rock apart. And then you've got some grasses and you've got some flowers like before, but you've also got starting to have some bushes, some small shrubs, some small trees, and then more soil. Again, year after year after year after year of things living and then dying. It's decomposing and making more and more soil. And in this one, we've got some larger cracks that are developing, and we can have all the previous species plus some small trees. And these fast-growing trees are called softwoods, because if you imagine the tree growing very, very fast, the wood is not going to be very dense. It's not going to be very compacted. It's going to grow really, really fast. So these are called softwoods. Pine trees would be considered this. The opposite of this is going to be a hardwood. So we continue growing and growing and growing and making more and more soil to where eventually there are still rocks in the soil, but they're being broken down, and you start getting hardwoods. And then when you get the development of trees, large trees that start growing in this community, one, a lot of the bottom stories are going to be blocked out by sun, but you can also see vines growing up, a lot more plant life, which means there's a lot more animal life, and you can start to see birds coming in, larger birds that are taking over different layers of this, living up in the tree, living on the tree or on the trunk. Some that are closer to the ground. You've still got some grasses, but it's not going to be as much because there are now trees that are taking up all the sunlight. So we go from bare rock to a climax community, meaning that it is the most advanced community, the height of communities. And again, a community is all the living organisms there. So we've got full food webs from producers, primary, secondary, tertiary consumers, quaternary consumers, decomposers, all that. That's primary succession. Primary meaning it happens. This is the first one because we're starting with essentially nothing, just rock. And succession because there's a certain series of events that happen. They go in a particular order. Well, secondary succession is very easy to understand if you understand primary. Secondary succession starts with soil. It begins with some soil, whereas this one, primary succession, did not have soil. Secondary succession does have soil, and some of the reasons that could cause this to start would be things like severe fire, there's land clearing, there may be some severe event that just wiped out all the plants in that area. And it continues from after this, it continues similarly to primary succession. There's not going to be as much time spent building soil because there's already soil existing. So if the seeds can get there, some of these larger plants can actually grow in there. But what tends to happen is you have grasses and flowers, small flowers, herbaceous level, that start growing first because they're quick growers, and you get bushes and small trees, and then eventually you get these large trees that grow very slowly, and it may take 50 to 100 years for these large trees to grow fully to where it's a climax community. But again, typically this is some kind of dramatic event, a big fire, maybe humans have gone in there and cleared the land and then stopped doing anything at all. And the primary plants on this one a lot of times may be pine trees, or they may be grasses. So whatever the pioneer is, it's going to be the first ones on the scene. Whatever the pioneer species is, it's going to be the first ones there.